All right, let's, I think we're all just about here. So I'll call the meeting to order with attendance. I'm here. Alan may show. John? How are you? Greg? Scott? Michelle, you're here? Jim? Stephanie? Don't see Stephanie. Lisa? Michael? Julie? Jennifer? And Peter? Oh, there's Alan. Okay, great. Thank you. We have a quorum. All right, are there any public comments on the agenda items? Hearing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. The items are on the consent agenda. As we talked about the last meeting, we're moving things up to the consent agenda to speed up the back end of the meeting. So are there any, Jim?
Thank you. I'm sorry, since I apologize, I was not at the last meeting. So is it going to be the procedure now that second readings of policy is put on the consent agenda?
If it's warranted. So if it's if the first reading was presented to the board and there's little or no change, then we would put it up on the consent agenda. The policy, the first one on there is policy just that. It's a new bylaw, I should say, addressing the consent agenda, and that item should be non-controversial and not subject to discussion.
All right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions? If not, the items on the consent agenda pass. Moving to the to the reports, and certainly start us off. You're going to see a new schedule for board meetings for next year on the agenda. You might have seen an email from the superintendent earlier today flagging this, and Megan will talk to it when we get to that item on the agenda. But the highlight is the suggestion is moving to a frequency of every 3 weeks, and again more on that when we get to that item on the agenda. But keeping in the theme of board meetings, I'm going to announce that the retreat that was scheduled for March 11th is being canceled. We're still going to keep the retreat that I think is on this schedule for early May, so keeping with 2 a year. So we'll cancel the March 11th retreat. And then there's a board meeting next week on the 4th. After conferring with the superintendent, we're going to suggest that we cancel that meeting so we don't have back-to-back meetings. However, the committees that were scheduled to meet that evening, I would strongly recommend that you continue as scheduled to hold those meetings. And I'm going to ask the bylaws committee, which is half the board, if they would attend the bylaws meeting in lieu of the board meeting at 7 p.m., same place, on the 4th of February. Next Monday. So while we have, everybody had that penciled in on their calendar, I think we could be more productive. And we don't have to burden the whole board with another meeting back to back. Okay?
Do you need a motion on the, or just?
I don't think I need a motion. I think I'm just canceling the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. I'm going to mix up my order here. The bylaws committee continues its work reviewing bylaws. Speaking of, we have a few more to review this evening, which we'll come to. And I want to say welcome to Nicole. I think you're here, right? Yes, you are here. The new face. And I could say we're all excited to have you join the team. It's been, what, a full day? And you're still here? That's great. Like to see it, but welcome. And last on my list, and it may be on your list, but I'm going to steal your thunder. I'm not sure it's on your list. But Model UN concluded this weekend, and there are several of us who have delegates that were on those committees this weekend. And for those who are not familiar with Model UN, it's an annual event held at Harvard and sponsored by Harvard students. And it brings in students from literally around the globe that come in to represent different countries in a series of events and fun and lots of really interesting things for the kids over a long weekend. Chapag represented Saudi Arabia, with one exception. Mr. Roush had a special invitation to take part on a special committee representing historical figures. And he represented Mongolia, so guess who he played, right? He was Genghis Khan. I'd like to hear how that went. So perhaps another board meeting, maybe he can come in character. But it's a really great event. I mean, I could speak, from listening to them talk about what they did all weekend, and it was a great balance of social and education, and they've made new friends. I know that, and truly from around the world. So I think it's great. It's really a great thing that's going on at Shabbat. So I don't know if you were going to mention that or not, but I wanted to. So, okay, great. Now, back to you.
Oh, he took the fun things. So I'm going to talk about frozen pipes. No, so I did want to let you know, as you know, last week we did have a delay of school. Part of it was due to the fact that we had a frozen pipe situation at Burnham School. So during the Martin Luther King weekend, the deep freeze we have a 3-phase system in our electrical system at Burnham, and it dropped to a single system, which meant that a lot of the major equipment, your furnace, boiler, all shut down at the time. So luckily, and I do say luckily, a custodian came by because they were cleaning off to prepare for getting rid of the ice and preparing for our students, and noticed it was quite cold. So called in all the right people. So in the meantime, because of this, Don is taking some proactive measures. So now, while we're searching out some alarm systems that'll let us know when the power goes out, and so we can make certain we don't have what could have been a potentially worse situation come to fruition. Don is working with the custodians to have them do school checks on weekends when temperatures drop below 20 degrees. So just they would circle the entire school. It is 3-hour minimum as it is, so any day that it drops below, that's what our plan is, to make certain that we don't walk into a very costly situation. So that is our stopgap until we can get a more permanent solution that we can rely on. As Power School is going, we are upgrading to version 12. The positive part of the upgrade is it's still going to look exactly the same for all of our teachers. So it has this beautiful mechanism where we're still going to get the benefits of the newer version, which will include having the GPA function. It allows for some rollover, so that way we're not manually entering things every time. And so the rollover is going to happen during the President's Weekend. So by February 21st, we will be able to have more access for our parents to get some of the information they are looking for regarding historical grades, GPA, etc. So I have to congratulate Vic and our entire team working with Power School to make certain that everything is at our fingertips versus having to manually enter. Additionally, the quarter 2 and semester 1 have ended or are ending, and we're trying to find out that efficiencies for the transfer. We understand some of the students, when they do a half-year course, it's when to end one teacher's rights and turn on the other. So that's something that we're currently consulting with our guidance department on to make certain that we're not disrupting the ability to work with the students from one teacher switch over to the other one startup. So. And additionally, in a very positive note, which was shared with our teachers today, Power School is now linking with our special education system. So the teachers will have access to students' IEPs, the latest changes, so it's no longer hunting or waiting. They'll be able to get the alerts right on that system. So it's really becoming a better way to service our students and get information that we need in order to personalize information as it's needed in lessons. So that's a very positive change that has happened. So I'll talk athletic highlights since you talked about some of the academic things outside of the school. So right now, our boys basketball are 8-4. They've already qualified for state and league tournaments. Right now, we are placed 4th in the league. Sophomore Owen Hibbard is the number 4 scorer in the league, averaging 17.9 points a game. So again, kudos to our teams. Our girls basketball team is focusing on qualifying for the state tournament for the first time in a few years. So far, they only need 2 more wins out of their 7 games left. So I think that it is well within reach, and we're looking forward to seeing them at states. As far as our swim team is going, we've had some great individual performances. I'm going to mess up this name, so please correct me if I say it wrong. Giacomo, thank you. There we go, Giacomo Colangio. Let me try that again. Giacomo Colangio has broken the freshman dive record, so kudos to him. And Jessica Kissling is primed to break the freshman record in the 100-meter backstroke. That said, I am shadowing Jessica for the day on Wednesday, so I will be in the role of a Chapag student, and Jessica is willing to let me shadow her for the day. So we'll have lots to talk about her swim accomplishments. Additionally, we have senior Jack, let me see this, Pesci, thank you, is the Berkshire League champion the last 200 years in the 200-meter individual medley and the 100-meter breaststroke. And Zach Tibbetts was the Berkshire League champion for the 100-meter butterfly. So far, both are undefeated in the events this season. Ice hockey is noticeably more competitive this season. We will not talk about their record, but we love that we love their spirit. So we are poised for a successful second half of the season. So we're looking forward to hearing their accomplishments. And we have some indoor track teams. Last time we did talk about our 3 students who have made states, and they have also qualified for additional events. I see some proud parents here. So Olivia Tibbetts and Gavin Block have added the 300-meter hurdles to their state qualifiers, and junior Cameron Brown has added the long jump to his hurdles. So other team members are right on the cusp of qualification and have the final opportunity on the February 4th meet at the Floyd Little Athletic Center in New Haven. And our Chapag cheerleaders will host the elementary and middle school clinics on February 1st, which culminates in a performance in which they're joined by their clinic goers for a halftime game at the girls' varsity game that same night. So other things that we have going on is that we do have a field trip coming up. This is just a notification. It is not an overnight. It is a day trip to Mount Snow in Westover, Vermont on February 23rd, which is a Saturday, for grades 6 through 12. This is part of a student senior project. So Ian has been coordinating, getting the chaperones, working with Mrs. Gallo. So the bus leaves at 6 a.m. and will return with some really tired students by 9:30 that evening. So that is just one to let you know is in the works. And some personnel notes. We do have the appointment of our second shift custodian at Washington Primary. James Ford is going to be joining our staff. He has worked with us as a sub-custodian in the past, has done a very wonderful job, incredibly reliable, and now we welcome him as a permanent part of our staff. And we do have a leave of absence. Sheila Gambino, our technology teacher, she was out January 11th. It was to be determined, but now we have it established. She will be returning to us on February 4th from her absence.
Are there any questions? Michael?
Actually, I had a question on something that you had sent out in your superintendent's update. And some of the board members probably have seen this on the news. It's been hitting the news quite a bit lately about the governor, and I believe it was one of the state senators' suggestion that we look at consolidation for districts that have populations under 40,000 or serve less than 2,000 students. Obviously, Chippewa would be affected along with every town except 26, I think, in the state. So very concerning, and I'm just wondering what our level of concern should be at this point and what you've been hearing. I would think we would have a little bit more of a safety margin considering the state's investing, millions of dollars in a new building.
Level of concern, I think that it's always good if it's something that you're going to see in the legislator, that if it's something that is interesting you, something you want to put your voice to, certainly reach out to Representative O'Neill and to just voice your opinion on what you're thinking behind it. Yes, it has a push to it. I don't know when you start getting into some of those logistics and the how-to and what would work. I don't know how that would all map out. I don't know if it becomes up to the regions to start buddying up or how that would happen with the surrounding towns. But when you start to look at 2,000 and below, it really does start to take on most of the districts in Connecticut. We recognize that the financial state our state of Connecticut is in is something in which this is where it's brought to concern. This is why they're bringing up what are some of the other efficiencies. We ourselves have been working with some of the efficiencies. We've been working with some of the smaller districts in order to find some cost savings. We recognize buying in bulk is always better, so we're pooling our resources to try to find out if we can start to develop some of those things that the state is looking for with the regionalization initiative. So we're already trying to, I don't want to say combat it, but meet the need with the appropriate actions as small districts.
I was going to say for years this was the third rail of state politics because no one wanted to talk about anything which diminished home rule rights of various communities in Connecticut. The difficulty is, unless the state passes a law that tells you you have to do it and overrides Supreme Court precedent, I don't see how it happens. I don't see how it's anything other than dead on arrival, unless they're going to say, I'm sorry, but you cannot have a school district smaller than this, and therefore you will be forced to regionalize. Absent that, there's no way to voluntarily do it without the votes of the citizens in the towns of the districts that are affected. And I think we could send them a primer on that, the likelihood that that's going to happen in this district. So they're going to have to override that whole line of Supreme Court cases to get there. So my guess is that there's not an enormous chance of this happening.
Michelle?
I reached out to Patrice McCarthy at CABE and just asked her to keep me posted on the progress of it. The bill is moving to the Education Committee, and she said she felt confident it would have a public hearing because the proponents of it, the bill, are very influential. So if it comes to a public hearing, there's always an opportunity to either write letters or go to have them submitted for the official record or to go in person and speak. So I'll keep you posted on whether that will happen or not. And hopefully, I mean, it's come up before and it's never, it usually dies. It's somebody's little pet thing. So hopefully she'll be able to have a sense of whether it's really got backing or legs this time. So I'll keep you posted.
All right. All right, so moving on to committee reports. Actually, Michelle, back to you at Advance.
I have no report, sorry.
No reports.
No.
And Stephanie's not here. And it's not fair. Nicole, the first night, to fill us in on all things financial. Michelle?
Just
Yeah.
tell us how our day went.
Well, yeah, either that or, well, I was just going to say that we had a meeting this week, well, last week, today's Monday, last week during the day, we spoke with Barry Bernabe about possible financing options for the bond that's coming up because the ban is expiring in April. So it will be we'll be putting that out in February or March. And he presented several scenarios, and the committee will be recommending to the board. Are we doing that tonight?
Not on the agenda.
Oh. Okay, well, the committee was unanimously in support of supporting an option that would keep the annual debt payments below the current level that it is this year. So, which is very exciting. So it would always be the same or less. And the rates are looking good. The model, everything's looking same or better than what we had in our original plan. So that was all good. We spoke about the bus contract. And was there a third item on the agenda? I think it was just those two. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
All right, facilities, Greg.
Facilities had a meeting this evening. We spent the entire meeting virtually going through Mr. O'Leary's proposed budget for operations, for facilities operations, not the capital portion of the budget, but the operations portion of the budget this evening. And generally, the budget is going to be roughly flat. I think it's down slightly, 0.03% or something for operations. That's what's going to be proposed, and then there'll be a capital budget. We're going to take up, I hope, next time.
Thank you. Anything on negotiations while you have the mic?
We will be continuing to negotiate with the union representing paraprofessionals and clerical staff. I think our next session is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Short session tomorrow, though. And that's more or less the status. We're still working on the contract on administrators in terms of a couple items that have to be sort of tweaked. So we're not quite ready with a finished contract yet on that. Negotiations are complete. It's a matter of making it read the way we've negotiated it. So that's just taking a little longer than we had anticipated.
So will we be discussing it in an exec session tonight?
I believe we'll discuss it in executive session. We'll bring you up to speed, and then that's probably all we'll do tonight.
Okay. All right, policies?
We met this evening and worked on several policies. There will be some brought forward in the future.
Okay, thank you. On to agri-science. Megan.
All right. Well, Colin's pulling up thank you so much, Colin. I appreciate it. Just one. So we have started to invite some of our applicants to shadow students at Chippewa. So we've already been greeting our new visitors, getting them the opportunity to see the amazing things that happen here at Chippewa School and highlight what their life would be like. I believe, Teresa, I'm going to share one of the statements that a student said as you overheard them walking out about how it just feels comfortable here, that it doesn't feel so tense, and it was a welcomed feeling. And so I think that that's a credit to our staff. It's a credit to the environment that's created here. So I like that there's an enthusiasm after they come and visit us as well. And they're not just focused on the imaginary building that will be there when they come in their first day of school. Currently, Lori Travato is setting up the interviews at each school. So we do have, in taking a look at our updated status, where we are today. So currently, and I have to thank Lori Ferrer has kind of dropped everything in order to help us get the curriculum so it is well articulated 9 through 12 and in preparing for the FF&E review. So in as much as in talking to the state, we went a little out of order with how they had granted our grant. I apologize for the redundancy of speech. And so typically what happens is you get the first part of your grant, and then you go back and you get the FF&E, and then that's approved. They rolled our FF&E approval into our original grant. However, we still have to go back and go through that process. So in order to make certain that we are pulling everything together, that it makes sense, our listing that we had and the predictions that were out there, that we are being responsive to have the curriculum and the curricular needs that are out there. And also taking a look at our pathways. We recognize that there's some emphasis on some, and we also recognize when we have our applicants, we have interests that weren't originally put on our pathways. So the environmental interest that is out there and making certain that we are responsive and that we are open to new pathways and how we are going to morph to meet the needs, but still provide them all with the experience. A lot of the students may not know what they necessarily want until we have the opportunity to have them do their exploration during 9th grade. So that did put us a little bit behind. So to know that, I do want you to recognize that the program has dropped to yellow. It was a let's turn around, let's make certain that everything is moving forward. Where do we need to go with it all? But at this time, we also have that we're looking at FF&E and our budget. Kim has been doing a really good job at seeing what is the operating budget versus what falls under FF&E. So the good news is she keeps coming back and saying, no, I think that's already in the grant. I think we have money. That is always a good phone call to get. But additionally, we have been talking to the teachers union to make certain we're talking about the language that's needed. Our agri-science teachers do not work a typical teacher's work schedule for the year, so we want to make certain that we're accommodating and supporting, and that is covered within the union, so we're working closely with them. And there are things that, as you're looking forth, you can see that we are also looking at scheduling for our agri-science students, the interviews, as I mentioned in the timeline. Some of the things that right now are giving me some trepidation is that we also have to make certain, as we have that FF&E review, there's timing for these purchases. We need to make certain we get that review so we can go forward with how that purchase would happen and reimbursements. Additionally, one of the first things that Nicole said to me is, when she came onto the position, I really want to get down to the state and we want to start putting things in for the electronic submission for our reimbursement. She has the right mindset to join Region 12, I will tell you right now. So that's under our, because I have to go down with her to the state. It is one we have to be trained together in order to make certain the submissions are happening. So that we're looking to schedule, if not at the end of this week, early next week, to make certain that we can get those reimbursements in sooner rather than later. But it does start to weigh on our mind when we're looking at these issues. And we also recognize that with Lori Travato, she's one person. So while she's tied up in interviews, we are pulling her in 16 different directions because we still have to get her for, as we're looking at curriculum, as we're looking at FF&E, what do we have to buy for our budget? So she's being pulled and stretched, and credit to her. Thank goodness she has the energy she does. But it is one that once we have the additional staff on, I think that'll alleviate some of the things going forward. So we recognize we're out of cycle for what is going to be our norm moving forward, because we really should already be into marketing to our 7th graders. But we recognize we're going to be a little ahead of what we did last year, but not aligned to where we need to be going forward. So that's why the marketing is also in yellow. So other things to notice is we have also had conversations regarding our horses and recognizing that we need to grow into horses. We recognize that the care can't come from freshmen who may not already know how to have horses. So year one will be about bringing horses onto site, working in partnerships with some of those local farms so that way we can learn. I believe that when we were looking at the exploration unit, I believe there were 5 weeks that their large animals needed to bring on during the exploration time in cycles. So because for each one and when they come onto campus based on when the exploration is, that's going to be very important, but we also have to recognize it may not be what is year one bringing on our horses right away for ownership. Additionally, you should know that the concrete underslab will be poured for the north B wing unit. The C wing south underslab piping will be filled in by midweek. So our foundation is coming together, which is exciting. And lastly, our schedule is intact. I say that because then I was also told, but just please notice that the rain in the forecast for next week. But right now, to say that they are on point, we are intact. It is moving forward. And again, I give a lot of credit to our contractor from ONG, Tim, has been absolutely outstanding. And I know that Greg is going to talk more to that. And our parking lot will be switched by the end of February. So students will go to the other side.
Any questions for Megan? I have a couple. Just to be clear, I guess the interviewing must be done by what, a certified agri-science teacher, I assume?
Right now, she's our most certified person in looking at what type of student we're looking for. So right now, yes, we do want to have her credentials behind as we're interviewing.
Makes sense. And the teachers union review, are they done with that review and any issues, or is that still in progress?
It's still currently in progress. We're looking at the teacher contracts from Nanawag, from Wamogo, so we're looking at how it's worded in other contracts to see what's going to work best for us.
Thank you. Michael?
Megan, just a suggestion. You were talking about marketing and the large animal status right now with horses specifically, and that totally makes sense. I mean, as freshmen, it's probably a stepped approach as to our expectations for where they're going to be going. But there might be some opportunities in terms of marketing that could also help students. I'm thinking of working with maybe an organization like Little Britches, which does therapeutic riding with horses. Maybe we can contact them and suggest that they host one of their annual events here at Chippewa. We'll have the facilities, even if our students aren't quite capable of taking care of the horses just yet. Maybe that would also serve as an opportunity not only to help them out as a not-for-profit, but also kind of elevate our status in the eyes of the riding community and get some great coverage for the fact that we have the facilities and we're looking for students who would love to work, with animals, and looking at career options like, working with special needs students sounds great too.
Point well taken, and I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for right now is what can, inviting the large animals, having the facility that's capable of having them come onto campus so our students can learn, recognizing the amount of opportunities that are out there, not just about riding horses, but what are some of those job opportunities that come along with that. So I think your recommendation is on point, and thank you.
Okay. Greg?
Well, I'll bring you up to speed on where we are, and I'm going to have a presentation for you with some pictures so you can get an idea of things that are going on in the project. I will say that we are probably about 7 weeks, a little bit short of 7 weeks from the vernal equinox, and that means spring is almost here. And I know that's hard to believe on a night when my daughter told me it is 40 degrees below zero in Minneapolis. Nonetheless, we are going to have spring, and when we have spring, we're going to have a lot of work going on. I want to just go through and talk a little bit about the highlights. Our schedule is intact, as the superintendent reported. We're looking at the site work being completed in the spring, or done in the spring, up on the athletic field replacement. the replacement field that's going to be up in the far northwest corner of the property. We're looking at spring site work being started and going into the summer on the areas around the building, and then in the areas over near where the animal facilities are, and the turnout and the outdoor riding ring. That's going to commence in the spring and go through the summer of 2019. We're going to see the parking lot, the main parking lot out front, done in the summer of 2019. And when that is complete, then we will turn toward the site work for the north parking lot, which will be completed in the fall of 2019. So that's where your site work is. Your buildings, most of the building will be complete by the end of the summer of 2019. There'll still be work ongoing on the north addition to the building and on the animal building. That will go a little bit into the fall, but not all the way through the fall. And then finally, the last pieces that get done, the last piece that gets done is the interior science labs, not the AgStem science labs, but the ones that are more interior, the chemistry lab and whatnot, will be completed during the fall of 2019. So that's sort of where we are. We have continued to work carefully with our construction manager to keep the project on track. We've had to deal with a couple of small changes in scope over the course of this. When we removed the hydraulic lift in the former auto shop, we found a little bit of contaminated soil. There was some spillage from the hydraulic fluid. It's an oil, and we had it tested. Fortunately, there were no PCBs in it or anything like that. But it required us to remove some soil, more than we had budgeted for. We had originally budgeted to remove some soil around that. We end up removing more. I don't have a fee cost yet, but it's not expected to be more than a couple of $1,000s of additional cost to the project. Certain areas of the soil we've reached that will some of that will remain in place. It will be completely segregated and attenuated naturally. But most of the soil that had some oil in it has been removed from the property, or is out stacked to be scheduled for removal from the property. So we have little issues and things like that come up as we go, and we deal with them as they happen. So let me see if I can make this produce some pictures here so you can get an idea of what's going on. These are areas, if I'm not mistaken, this is just off of the building. And as you can see, there's excavation ongoing and the installation of drainage. Whoops, I'm going to come back. Here you have inside the building excavation for sub-slab removal of wastewater. This is for all the sinks, the bathrooms, the other areas that produce wastewater. That's how it's removed. As you can see, that project continued to pace inside the north end of the building. As you can see, the holes then got filled with pipes. And you'll see lots of stubs standing up, and those are for access to the drainage pipes. And this is just fascinating stuff. There's one that stubs up so we can have access to it and drain that out. As you can see, there's a lot of this going on in the entire facility. And I should have taken some of these out because they're all mostly the same thing. I apologize for that. But then, of course, it's been filled in and compacted. And so that north area of the building and the south area of the building are ready to have the slab poured, which will be done shortly. As you can see, there's areas of slab that were cut around that are still maintained. This is the soil that's difficult to remove if you have any kind of spill. You can't go under the slab to remove it and undermine it, and you're not required to do it either. So as you can see, we've been digging, moving, filling trenches, and good God, there's a lot of these. And I'm trying to get to the site, some of the exterior site work, which you may have already taken a look at. Anyone who'd like to take a tour through this area and look at it, the building will be open in the fall of 2019. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that goes on under the floor. And this is the part that nobody sees, and this is the part that nobody appreciates. And it's not the spring yet when you're going to see the structural steel delivered in April. And you're going to start seeing structural steel going up. This is the part that costs a lot of money and has to be done if the rest of the project is going to work. Now you see we have been tearing up a lot of dirt outside. And this is going to continue apace as that work is completed during the spring and summer on most of the site work around the building. But yeah, it's a construction site. Yeah, it's ugly, but stay tuned. We're going to have quite a project here in short order. And that's what your building committee has been up to.
Thanks, Greg. Any questions? All good, Alan?
Just a scheduling. I think the last thing you said before the pictures was that the interior science labs were going to be the last thing to be done.
When I say the interior ones, I mean the ones that are closest to where you're sitting right now.
Right.
Because the chemistry lab is actually still functioning. That's pretty much the only lab back there that's still functioning, and that's going to have to continue to function until we're able to construct its replacement, and then that'll have to be dropped, and then we'll do the last labs that are closest here, and those will go in the fall, after summer and into the early fall of 2019. Actually, later fall of 2019, by the time you get to the ones that are right next to the library.
Is there a reason? It just seems like they're sitting there empty, just waiting to be worked on. And so I'm just wondering why those are last. And it's inside, so it's not dependent on the weather.
Well, there's been an effort to try to get the AgSTEM program buildings, the portions that are necessary. See, right now we're using temporary science labs to replace these. The idea is to try to get the AgSTEM classrooms and the portions of the building for AgSTEM mostly up before the end of the summer of 2019, so that they'll be open in time for school. And that's the idea, so that there's been a tremendous focus of effort to try to finish those as soon as possible. And these science labs that are in here are the least critical time-wise in terms of getting them done, so they've been pushed to the end of the project in order to get AgSTEM up and running in time for the fall.
So O&G just doesn't have enough people to work on it simultaneously? Is that?
Well, there are things you have to do in a particular order, and you have got contractors that have got to do the job, and I don't know that they can. Certain things have to be done before they can get to other things, and so the problem is that you don't always have. It's not a perfect thing where just throwing more people at it necessarily produces a better result. One of the things that they're doing is they're trying to, through very interesting procedures, trying to cut time off of the deliverables. And they've had some success at that. They've had some success at moving some things along up in the schedule. If they really are able to get good weather, and right now when you go outside and the last few days and it's been in the 40s, and it's been sunny and not raining, that's good weather. They would rather have snow than rain, okay? Because they've said that if they got 10 feet of snow, they've got big machines and they can move it out of the way. You get rain, soggy soil that freezes, that's a mess. It's hard to deal with. And so if they continue to get reasonable weather throughout the course of the winter, that's going to advance the dates for these things further up the schedule. And they're trying very hard to get this thing done early. I don't know if it's possible because obviously they have to get it done right. And that's the most important thing. But they are working hard to try to move up that schedule. But right now, the scheduled last part of it are those couple of science labs that are right next to in here. And I think if you had to put anything at the end, that's probably what you would do.
Maybe. It's hard just because all the students use those, and they'll be down for this whole year. So to think of them being down for another semester, especially it's just hard for me to understand why you can't just throw more people at it, because it is inside. It's not weather dependent.
I will ask that question of our building
That would be
people as to whether or not there's any way to move it up. Part of the problem, don't forget, is they're also trying to bring these contracts in at a certain price. I mean, the pressures on this job have been enormous. We started out with an 18-month delay because of the state not financing anything and not being able to pass a budget in the legislature. When you look at the impact of that on the project, it's a multi-million-dollar impact. So that there's a lot of cascading things like that that have pushed us in the position of delaying the job, increasing the costs, going out to bid, getting bids that were pretty close to what our best hope was. And, we should have started this job with much larger contingencies and without having to do so much value engineering. But we're really trying hard to bring it in, not just on time, but on price. And so that's part of it, but I'll ask him if there's a reason why those have been pushed to that level. My guess is there's infrastructure that has to be done first before they can complete those, but I'll verify that.
great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Greg. All right, I think we heard earlier about, I think the real update on the financial status, that we're moving to the bond, moving to the phase now where we got to start thinking about our bonding strategy and the timing for that. So when
Actually, what I want to add on that is I want to say that it's very important that we move forward with our bonding and get it done primarily because we have $9 million worth of bands. And we've spent a couple to $3 million of that. At some point in time, you run out of running room. It's a $34 million project. So we need to get that moved done. That's what I know our director of finance and our superintendent are committed to moving that along as quickly as possible. So we can start getting state reimbursements as well. That's also part of it. We need that state money to come back in, and they're going up to Hartford to make that happen because they need to be trained in the new computer system. So,
John?
Yeah, I'd like to add, as a follow-up to the debt planning session we had last Thursday, and it's about what Greg was referring to as far as staying within the contingency. Bob maintains that it may not be necessary to bond the entire $9 million. We may be able to reduce that to $8 million, since over $1 million has already been expended using the funds we already had. So that's the good news. Our annual debt repayment will be significantly reduced if we stay within the expenditures for the contingency, and can only manage to spend the bond the $8 million. The other portion of that was Barry Bernabe, he's the managing director of Phoenix Advisors, who is issuing who may be helping us to issue the bonds, stated that sometimes the bond underwriters pay a premium of, in this case, it might be as much as $100,000, which will help to offset some of our costs.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and I think the other footnote on the financing piece is that you're right. While we could probably wind up bonding a lower principal, we still have to account for the timing issue with the state reimbursement, right? So there's going to be probably a bond for a certain amount, and then another band, possibly 2 series, to bridge us to the point where the state reimburses our money. And that I believe was factored into that conversation, right?
At the back end, the state holds back 11%
Of the total,
all the, yeah, exactly.
right.
So that is payable sometime after the completion of the project, so.
Right. Greg?
I was just going to add, if we can get our application in for that first state payment shortly, I think that's a 90-day window there. The funds arrive about at the time when we're really going full gun here on building. And so the timing would be perfect, because it'd be about a month before the first huge requisition comes in on it. And that's what we have to time for, is to make sure that we have that in time for those first big requisitions.
Okay. Anything else? Ted? Nothing? Nicole? Anything you want to say? You don't have to.
Say something.
You say something.
No, and we do have a mirror what Megan said. We do have a priority to get up to the state to get the training that we need so that we can make sure we can draw down the bonds as soon as possible.
Okay. All right. So, thank you. So moving on to item number 6 on the agenda, SAT results and next steps. Lori, you going to share with us?
So we're going to clearly change gears a little bit here.
A little bit.
Right? Okay. So I have a short presentation about our most recent SAT scores, just to calibrate. As part of the standardized testing process for all public schools now, in April of each year for the past 3 years, we give what's called the Connecticut School Day SAT. Now, students can still take the SAT other times on their own, but this is a state-sponsored, state-paid-for event where all 11th graders take the SAT. It focuses on evidence-based reading. They call it writing, but it's really language and grammar. There's no essay portion to the Connecticut School Day, and then your math. So my goal is to review the data to show you where we are, then introduce some comparison data to show you where we want to be, and then finally I hope to explicate a little bit on the changes we hope to make based on an analysis of the data. Ready? Okay. Participation. The state calls for 95% participation rate. We always exceed that rate. Our students are very dedicated. So we've 98, 100, and 100 for the past 3 years. In fact, they're so dedicated that last year I recall vividly that we had 4 kids with the flu taking the SAT. So I never did a sort of a look back about how many kids were sick the week after. But those 4 took the SAT with the flu. So the next slide is our 3-year data for the SAT. So you'll look, it's self-explanatory. In 2016, 50 students took it with a combined score of 1095. Combined simply means you add the English, the reading portion, and the math portion. 2017, 58 took it with a combined score of 1107. 2018, 66 took it with a combined score of 1063. So the best year so far has been 2017. 2018 scores dropped. The most significant drop, which I'll talk about more in a minute, was English, was reading. You could look at 574 versus 532. So our significant drop that year was in evidence-based reading and writing. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Some more comparison data first. There's 2 things I've compared on this graph, just for time's sake. The first thing I want you to look at is the Region 12 PSAT that was given in October 17th. 63 of the grade 11 students took it for a combined score of 1010, 517 in English, 493 in math. In April, the same cohort of students took it for a combined score of 1063, 532 in English, 530 in math. Now, there's something that, to me, is very important to note here. From the year before, we had put in pretty significant supports to math. So if you'll look at math, from the PSAT to the SAT, the students went up 37 points. We devoted our advisory periods. I'm sure those of you who are parents know it. We devoted our advisory periods to students who were struggling to get SAT prep in math. We didn't have the time to put supports in for English in the school day, and so we see the difference there. Now we know. The second comparison date, let me finish on that for a minute. So you'll see that on the Region 12 SAT in April, the combined score was 1063. 74% of the students demonstrated proficiency in English, 45% of the students demonstrated proficiency in math. Compared to then we go down a row and we compare Chappaqua to the whole state of Connecticut. So Connecticut had a 30,000 and change take the test for a combined score of 1014, 513 in English, 501 in math, 61% proficient in English, 40% proficient in math. And then the nation for that time period had approximately 149,000 students take it for a combined score of 970, 487 in English, 483 in math, 51% met the benchmark nationwide, and 33% met the benchmark nationwide for math. So that being said, you know, when you look at this one, you say, well, you know, we're doing better than the state and the nation, but we're not doing well enough. And that's pretty clear to me, and I'm sure it is to you. When I look at what matters more to me, it's this. We're in Dirk C. When the average of all the schools in Dirk C, right, their combined score is 1097. The highest performer in Dirk C had a combined score of 1148 versus us. So we need to be at least there. Dirk B schools had a combined average score of 1137, the highest score of 1196. Dirk A schools had a combined score of 1196 with the highest score of 1218. So I think it'd probably be dissertation worthy to know why SAT scores improve as the Dirks go up, because I don't think it's as cut and dry as we think. I will tell you what was interesting, though. I made some calls to Dirk B and Dirk A schools to ask them about their curriculum and ask them about a lot of things. One of the things they did say for 3 of the phone calls was that their students do a lot of extra enhancement. In other words, the majority of their students go to Huntington Learning Center, go to SAT boot camps, they get tutors, and there's a culture in the school that this is an expected practice. So I'm hoping that we can put some enrichment activities in our summer and during our breaks. Not that that replaces changes to curriculum, but I'm saying it's an added plus that I'm hoping we can do also. So what do we need to do to improve? I want to at least get to the 1148, right? What do we do to improve? First thing is obvious. We have to balance support so that we put as much reading and language support in as we put math in. We have to offer more enrichment opportunities, which I just spoke about. And most importantly, of course, we have to change our curriculum. But when we drill down to the data, we're not really talking about changing curriculum in grade 10 and 11. We're talking about changing curriculum in grade 7s to 9. That's where we have to make our biggest changes, in grade 7 to 9. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Before I do, I just want to give you some anecdotal information that many of you may already know. The SAT is a very traditional test. It does not focus on big ideas. It doesn't focus on critical thinking and evaluating and debate and argumentative writing, the things that I think Chappaq does very well. It focuses on granular skills, granular grammar, granular language skills. So for an example, I did a little work with the grade 11 in grammar, and we were analyzing some of the questions. And 3 of the questions out of 10 called upon the students to determine the right way to punctuate sentences that had conjunctive adverbs versus coordinating conjunctions, when to use the semicolon and when to use the comma between the 2 independent clauses if you have a coordinating conjunction or if you have a conjunctive adverb. That's pretty granular. Back in the day, I think I studied that probably in my 2nd year of college in advanced composition. So we need to change the way we do business in an effective way. And this is really important to say, because we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. we do some things really well, and we cannot abandon them, and we cannot change them. That's why I say to you, we have to make our move down to the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, because what we do in 10, 11, and 12 with regard to fluent writing and debating and arguing and looking at bias and looking at historical perspectives can't be changed. So we've got to get down to that discrete, granular level of targeted skills earlier on. And when you talk about that, that's where we're going. So we did professional development in October of this year, where we brought all the K-8 English teachers together, and we talked about the vertical alignment to prioritize language standards, language conventions they call it. And we're now focusing more on those discrete language conventions and the way conventions support reading and writing. If you had younger kids, they'd probably start complaining about it already, but we're doing it. In grade 9 and 10, we're revising our curriculum to incorporate more direct targeted instruction in language and language conventions. Those of you who are close to my age, you know, if anybody is, I don't know, but you know words like diagramming, and you know all the attention that was spent on grammar. Well, that's the kind of thing that the SAT lives for. I'm an old school grammarian. I have no problem with it. There is some issue, though, that the universities and the research don't value it as much as they used to. And the teachers that are coming out of colleges are learning new ways to teach. So we almost have to retrofit those teachers to a more traditional environment if we want to prepare our students for the SAT. And that's where you see that first bullet and that second bullet coming in. We are also going to do some more discrete work with grade 9, focusing on vocabulary building. The SAT works a lot with complex vocabulary, Greek, Latin prefixes, affixes, that kind of thing. So we've put some units of study in directly into grade 9, focusing exactly on analyzing word structure, using roots and affixes, etymology, and interpreting dictionary entries. This is, again, going back to much more traditional kinds of teaching. In grades 6 through 11, we've revised our English and social studies curricula to incorporate more evidence-based reading and responding. That is not traditional. That's new. That's more new. But we do have to work in ELA to successfully blend the conceptual teaching, which we do really well, with that much more traditional targeted skill-based teaching in all grade levels. I'll stop for a minute and see if you have any questions about ELA before I move to math. Mike Sinatra, you don't want to talk about diagramming or any of the important things in life? Just as an aside, Mike, you'll appreciate this. We have huge debates in the English department about the pedagogical dilemma of going backwards. You know what I mean? Because when you learn to be an English teacher, most recently, and they give you the research and they give you your methodology, here's what they teach you. Every individual has a certain speech pattern. They use certain sentence structure, certain syntax. And when they write, they have unique individual sentence syntaxes that they use when they write. We all speak differently. We all write differently. So our job as English teachers is normally to take the cognitive syntax pattern of that individual and help them become better writers using that pattern, right? So we have them write. We hold individual conferences. So if Greg Kava is already a beautiful writer in sentence structure and all he needs to do is learn to vary his phrases, that's what we focus on for him. If Mike Sinatra has trouble punctuating subordinating clauses and independent clauses, that's what we focus on for him. But the SAT doesn't allow you to show your skill with writing and fluency. The SAT gives you passages that someone else has written with errors, and you have to fix those errors that don't belong to your cognitive syntax. You follow me? And so it's foreign. And so you're looking at these sentences and you're saying, first of all, the sentence isn't written by you, and then you're trying to spot the subtle error. Well, should the semicolon go before the conjunctive adverb, or should it be a comma and then the semicolon goes after the conjunctive adverb? And so you know how about to fall asleep right now. You can imagine doing this in class for 45 minutes, right? You have to really weave it in and almost wear a clown suit so the kids aren't falling asleep. And this really, so this traditional approach to drilling these targeted skills to get kids ready for the SAT is very different than you want to teach. And it's very different than kids want to learn. So it's an art form to get it in there and not numb everybody's mind. Yes?
So my son was one of them that you had in 11th grade for
Oh, that I did
the grammar.
Grammar.
And you did very well in your clown suit because he loved it. And he said he learned more in that time period because I think you're right as far as the curriculum goes. And maybe it's even earlier, but I don't think they teach grammar like the traditional grammar that that you're talking about because he learned so much in that session and I think it's helped him tremendously. So I think if we could look at that, I think that would be a clue to maybe help with the SAT and just writing in general and speaking. I mean, it's you have to have grammar. But anyway, your talk has been really interesting, and I hope you do more of those
Clown
sessions,
suits?
those clown suits and the
Clown
sessions
suit session?
with the kids.
That's very kind of you, though, to say, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the feedback, and I have to tell you, I agree with you. We have to step back, even if we don't feel that this is the most valuable way to teach and learn. It's the test we have, and we have to make it matter the most. Mm-hmm. So that's that, right? That's that.
Right.
I'm going to talk a little bit about math.
I think you had a question. Greg had a
Oh.
question.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble wrapping my arms around this concept of idiosyncratic approach to. I mean, there's some people that just use ellipses and that's all. There's some people that don't understand the use of grammar. I mean, or punctuation. I mean, why is that acceptable? I mean, isn't the goal that everyone should emerge from high school being able to write the English language?
Yes, Greg, let me correct myself if I didn't give the full. What happens is that some students intuit the language in such a way that they're very fluent right out of the gate. And to have them go through grammar lessons just to learn the jargon when they already write fluently, many universities that teach methods to English feel that that's not the most effective use of time. You just target the grammatical areas that the student is weak in. I am old school. I believe that everyone should know grammar like the back of his or her hand. But the teachers that come out of school new aren't taught that way, so we almost have to retrofit the teachers. That was my point. I'm sure, Mike, if you have new teachers, do you find that they come in from college with a different methodology, a different headset for teaching the language? And the SAT doesn't measure that new headset. It measures the old way, like you're talking about, Greg. Everyone should know the grammatical jargon. Everyone should know what every mark of punctuation is. And so that's the way we're going to teach it.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but it seems to me that if someone cannot pick up, by the time they're in the 11th grade, cannot pick up a badly written piece of English and fix most of the problems in it, then what are we teaching in these classrooms? I'm having a hard time figuring that out.
Okay, so
It doesn't do any good if people come to me who want to be employed as lawyers and they can't write. It doesn't help. They don't get a job. And the same thing in many other areas of it. And I'm just having a hard time understanding
so I think that
why
our
we've
students...
tossed this out.
We didn't toss that part out, Greg. Our students spend a lot of time writing, and they're good writers. What I think was tossed out are things like this. What are the 10 most common conjunctive adverbs? When do you use these conjunctive adverbs? What is the difference between a conjunctive adverb, a coordinating conjunction, and a subordinating conjunction? It's the jargon. You see what I mean? And so we have to go back because you can't teach those skills on the SAT unless they know that jargon like the back of their hand,
Greg, can I just interject?
even if they're good writers.
Just for a second. I think, and there is a recognition, the pendulum has swung so far the other way that it became about getting the students to write something down, and it was about, getting them to recognize what is persuasive writing versus getting those conventions of writing set. And so when you lose those mechanics, when you lose some of those things because you're just worried about getting them motivated to write something down, yes, we've lost an art form. And to say that what we're trying to do is not just say it's got to be fixed in 11th grade. And that's when Lori spoke of going back to kindergarten. What are those developmental milestones that we need to be bringing them up through the paces so that way by 11th grade, we have strong writers, that the message doesn't get marred by the lack of the mechanics that they utilize. And so that's, I think, when we're looking at, we don't want to lose that conceptual, but we need to make certain we are skill building along the way.
Let me ask one other question then. The question always is why have we gotten to this point? Why have we had to go so far off the deep end on understanding how to write in certain ways, or persuasively, or whatever it is you're trying to learn? Could it be that we don't spend enough time writing, period? Could it be that we spend too much time with these bloody picture books, which is what these are? These are picture books. We're looking at pictures. We're being motivated by images more than being motivated by writing. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we need to rethink this.
Is that a rhetorical question, or are you asking me my opinion?
That's a good
Of course it is a rhetorical
It's a
question.
rhetorical question.
rhetorical.
Ellen,
And if you could use at least 11 parts of speech in responding to it, I'd be appreciative.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess
Exactly.
texting has
You're
something
counting,
to do
Greg.
with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Ellen?
I
Yes,
just want to ask, some of it seems what you're saying is and I haven't seen an SAT test in a long time, obviously. They're asking for descriptors of the mechanics, or are they being tested in a
they're being
the
tested
multiple
on
choice way of?
No, they're being tested on errors, right?
Right.
Errors that the kids have to fix. The problem for teachers is that you can't teach those errors until you teach all the descriptors. So the jargon has to be front loaded.
I guess that's what I'm a little confused about, is because you could, if you are in an example of someone who's very fluent in their writing, yet doesn't have the jargon, they would still be able to recognize, because their fluency implies that they know the opposite. They know how not to write.
So
So they could
not
see
necessarily
if something
knowing,
is
what
wrong.
happens is it's not their writing, it's somebody else's writing, it's somebody else's syntax. So it's a foreign sentence already, and then they're trying to fix somebody else's cognitive syntax.
But that's what's confusing to me, because there's either, if we're talking about something on an SAT, there's either incorrect or there's correct syntax, as opposed to what you're talking about might verge into the world of style, in which case there's someone's syntax has its own meter, or it has its own level of clarity, or its own facility or vocabulary. But what I'm hoping is that we're not really talking about a subjective stylistic approach in the SATs, but a real right or wrong. And one would assume that a fluent writer could recognize wrong syntax, not foreign syntax or different syntax, but clearly the SAT should be asking what's wrong as opposed to what's maybe clumsy.
Well, what the SAT asks often is what's better.
Ooh.
It's hard.
So there are some that are right and wrong, but some are not. Some are better.
Okay. Well, one thing I'd like to add here is while we're talking in greater theory of this, which I don't hear a lot of, and maybe you can filter this back up through the echelons, is that I believe that in the last few decades, what we're doing, and it's just a kinder, gentler version of what Greg was intimating about these devices, is that we're in a transition period from writing longhand or writing on typewriters, where humans had to fully create sentences in their heads and write them down. Now you only have to create thoughts, which may be as short as clauses or a collection of words, and then you see them, and then you change your mind, and you just hit this button, and it's clean, which is quick and efficient. But you're no longer doing the writing in your brain; you're doing it in front of you.
Alan,
And there's a transition in the
you could not
education.
be more right. You could not be more right by what you just said, because when you write out the whole sentence, you see the clause and the awkwardness of it in context.
Right.
You are absolutely right.
But when you
That's
have
why-
it in your head, your fluency comes inside, and then because you don't want to have to erase all that, but now you can, and it's a different way of learning language. And I think from what you're saying is you have an interim level of language teachers, English teachers, who haven't grappled with that yet. And we're going to get there on both sides, I would hope. You know,
I would hope also.
yeah.
Yep. I would like to talk about this more, but I'm going to get in trouble. I know. So let's talk about math, which really, you know. No. Mary Ann Marr is clearing her throat behind me. So math is doing a lot of work. Math has put in grade level screening assessments for students in grades 6 through 12. So the assessments are based on what the students should have mastered the year before. And then they're using the data to revise the curriculum. So this is another old-fashioned but tried and true practice. They're revising the Algebra 1 curriculum. Those of you who have had children take the SAT know that if you don't have Algebra 1 down, that's it. You can't. You cannot progress. You have to get Algebra 1 down. Some schools, as you know, do 2 years of algebra, like an A and a B. But so we have to really focus our attention more on algebra. Mary Ann is doing volunteer after-school math practice sessions, and she's also doing volunteer SAT Saturday math review classes. They're doing interactive notebooks in algebra and geometry. Their goal is to increase the focus on applied math and improve students' ability to apply mathematical problem solving to written problems. I want to tell you something that is so interesting. We all know that math problems are reading, right? There's a huge connection between prepositions and the use of math problems, to, from, and what those prepositions mean in terms of mathematical operations. So we have to pick up the slack in reading also to help students with math problems. It's all about grammar, no matter what.
Way to hijack it.
I know. We have supports in place that continue from previous years. You know them already. The board generously has all students take the PSAT so that we can get a reading on where they need to, what improvement they need to do, and then they work with Khan Academy based on those personalized results. You know that we do a math prep during advisory. I referenced that earlier. We give the time to math, but we have to balance with English now that we saw what happened when we don't. And we always use SIT-aligned questions included in the course assessments. Now, of course, we're focusing much more on language than we did. Before, we focused a lot on reading. Now we're backing up and focusing actually on language. For the future, I would like to think about having more support labs in the middle school for literacy and numeracy, more Saturday and after-school targeted test prep, and more supported enrichment during the summer months. So that's SAT in a nutshell. Does anyone have any other questions? Yes, Alan.
So as far as the enrichment, what you found from speaking to the other DERGs, or some of the schools in the other DERGs, we do Catalyst Prep in March of each year, which is a one-shot kind of boot camp kind of prep kind of thing. What you're talking about is, as you said, on Saturdays or something more ongoing part.
Like the SAT boot camps, Alan, they talk a lot about test strategy. You know, eliminate 2 and then you have a 50-50. They talk about a lot of strategy. I'm talking about skill building.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's something that implies something more ongoing on a semester basis.
Yes.
Is that something that you have to engineer within Region 12, or is that something that you can outsource to something similar to Catalyst Prep or C2 and these other, or Stanley, whatever it is, Stanley Kaufman? In other words, did you find from these other DERGs that it really is encouraging an out-of-school?
They outsource it.
They do outsource it.
To Huntington, they go to Huntington, and I'm sure we could do that, except that for our kids, it's far.
Right.
Right? It's a far drive. So, but yes, we could.
Yeah, but I was just wondering if you look into that and find if there might be something in
and I am
Brookfield
going
or
to look
Southbury
into
or
it.
something like.
Yep. Thank you very much for your time.
And Lori, I've got a question.
You do?
Yeah.
Is it about commas?
No, Jaren's. So when you talk to the other DERG, do you get a feel for how many hours that they're putting in per student in extra work for SAT prep, like instructional hours,
Anthony, do you mean in the school or out?
both.
Well, you're going to think I'm exaggerating when I tell you this, but listen to what one of the schools said to me. Their students pick their colleges in grade 8 and 9. And then every day after school, the kids go to some Huntington or tutorial support. If they play sports, they go at night. So the culture is so competitive that it's almost all year that they go for academic enhancement. Funded by the parents. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm not
And is that all the children? Or most of the children?
most.
Wow.
And I don't want you to think I'm advocating that line
really our
of,
culture.
but I'm just sharing with you what they said.
And that's the culture that's
Yeah.
developed. And so to say that is something that they've perpetuated in looking, and to say there's a beautiful balance that you need to strike, which is not to crush students, but to give them a sense of urgency and to make certain that we're also changing to meet the demands without doing it at the last minute. It should be built in through our system. So we are making certain they are gradually growing and prepared for this assessment.
I would like us to be able to maybe think about, and I'm not talking about for free, but some tuition-based, maybe summer work at the earlier levels, at the 8th and 9th level, so that the 10th and 11th isn't the crunch.
But it sounds like the point Megan made. It sounds clear that you're not going to get a step function of improvement in these scores with an hour here or an hour there.
You're
right?
not, Anthony.
It's much bigger, much more involved than that, right?
Yes.
Right. And okay.
And we have
And-
to talk about that in more length.
I hope so. I hope we have more ideas coming back and about how we can do that, either independently or. But the point is, there's got to be more collective effort being put into it, right, to drive the kind of results that we're looking for. And to your point, everybody's point, starts much earlier in the game, not as a junior, probably not even as a sophomore. It's way back,
One of the schools I talked to said they begin in grade 7.
right? Right, and until and as long as the SAT is the test, or at least one of the aptitude tests or entrance tests that colleges use, we have to. That's the game, right? Those are the rules of the game, whether we like them or not. We have to, and that's what we've got to do. So I think we need to make the adjustments. I want to two things. One is I appreciate the candor that came through in the presentation.
Thank you.
I mean, I think it's really good and healthy that we could take more of a clinical look at how we're doing and look for error, understand what we do well, as you pointed out, because it's never binary, right? So the fact that you can understand what you are doing well and keep doing more of it, but also understand that there's opportunities to improve and go figure out what they are. And and then next year you turn the crank again, and you keep driving. So I appreciate what's coming through, and I realize this is a first step, but it starts with understanding the data and getting your head wrapped around the reality of our challenge. So I appreciate that. And then one last comment, Mike, and I'll give you the floor. When you have when you're thinking about scheduling, just a request that advisory. We only have 2 advisory periods. One of those periods is used by bio.
I know, for the AP kids, yeah.
Yeah, and of course athletics on Saturdays. With or after school programs, it all sorts of collides, and there's no optimal schedule here. But if we could just be very cognizant of where those clashes are, and anything you could do to alleviate some of that pressure, I think the kids would appreciate. So, Greg, you were first. Is that right? Okay, sure. Michael.
I don't know about that, especially at the end of the day. I appreciate that you've been focusing, especially on the math side. I know you mentioned this as part of your presentation, on those students who have been identified as really needing some extra support. And it sounds like you've got a real plan in place for those students for at least for the last year, and maybe even longer than that, in terms of different opportunities for them to get that extra support, which I'm assuming it would be interesting to see if that really, in your opinion, has made a difference, at least for that cohort of students that were identified as struggling. And I'm wondering if that same level of support, if we give the students on literacy, would have a significant impact as well. I know it's not many months from now that we're looking at budget season, and I know in the past that it's been in the budget for that level of support, and I'd like to tell you now as a board member, I would support that if you have a plan in place, if you were saying we'd like to bring up literacy support the way we've brought up our math support, and what those dollars would be. I think it would be a really good investment from my perspective.
I will do a little bit of looking into that then. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm wondering if starting in 7th grade is starting soon enough on some of these concepts. Like, you're worried about learning all the jargon of all the different parts of speech and everything else. I mean, the more you don't have to cram into any one year, the better it's likely to be learned and retained. And so I'm wondering if you really need to be starting in the 5th grade. Because I can tell you right now, until you take a world language, in my experience, most people don't know anything about English grammar until they learn it in world language. And that's really where you're going to learn it, because you don't have to use it when you've learned to speak as a native speaker of your language. You don't have to worry about grammar because it's innate, because you started learning it when you were a toddler or earlier, and you worked your way up. And now we expect kids to learn all of this theory and all of these words, and you want to pack it into a few years, and it's not going to happen unless you throw them in the deep end of the pool and say, if you don't learn how to use it, you're not going to get anywhere.
I think, Greg, when we talked about this at the PD, I think we should be starting in 3rd grade. I don't think 3rd graders, I know I'm going to sound mean when I say this, but 3rd graders are old enough. Mike, your 8 parts of speech, they can get it. They can get those 8 parts of speech down. They can understand subject-verb agreement. They can understand the basic things so that they can read better, so that they know which 2 words communicate the main idea of every sentence. So, Greg, I absolutely agree with you. When they talk about 7th grade, I think they're talking about more of that hardcore after-school prep. But as far as in-school goes, we have to start making those conventions as soon as they can read.
Well,
I absolutely agree with you.
The other thing is if you're going to increase the performance on, for example, I'm looking at English right now, if you're going to increase the performance, or the total actually between the 2, English and math, if you're going to increase the performance 80 points, how much of that 80 points is going to come from being able to write and speak English and being able to do math, geometry, algebra? How much of it's going to come from that? How much is it going to come from test prep? Because frankly, I would personally like to see test prep made illegal in this country. I would end it. If you have to study how to take the test no longer tells me anything about what you've learned and what your intelligence is. What you've learned is how to game the system. And I think it's immoral. I don't think it should be allowed. But because we live in the world we live with parents that are so competitive that they're going to have to get their kids into a good SAT prep course in the 2nd grade, then I think we're going to have to live with it. But I would really hope that we don't make the achievement numbers achievable only by gaming the system, because what I'm reading is that more and more top-notch liberal arts colleges are throwing the SAT in the garbage and aren't using it. So if we're going to game our whole system toward learning how to take the test, how are we teaching these kids to be great writers and great mathematicians?
And I think that's what Alan and Anthony were getting at when they were saying, when we do something over the summer, it's got to be some longer-term enrichment, not the boot camp, not the test prep. I agree with that also. And the thing about the enrichment that focuses on the skills is that the SAT will get you into the college, but it won't help you pass the courses. We know that, right? Whereas the other prep will. The other grammar prep, the reading prep, the numeracy prep will help you actually pass the courses. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So, Megan, our revised schedule, you would like to,
Thank you. So last board meeting, we had passed the Board of Education meetings, and we kept with the traditional theme of every 2 weeks. And I'm also listening to conversations that I've had with people separately. The time it takes as a board member, recognizing the pulls that happen. But additionally, and selfishly, I also think that some of our committee conversations are quite short sometimes. And some of those things that are happening, that's the background work and really the bones of our meetings that happen here publicly, are things that sometimes get shortchanged due to timings of meetings. So looking at if we go towards every third Monday and keep a rotation, it still cuts where we're still able to get to any topics that need to be brought in, but it also allows for some of those other Monday nights to be meeting with committees where we can really massage some of those ideas. And I think about in finance recently where we've had 2 meetings that weren't backed right up to those Board of Education meetings, and we were really able to delve into and ask those questions. So when we came to these meetings, we were all informed consumers. We were all able to share and have those meaningful conversations about some of those next steps. And so I proposed a schedule that takes us to every 3 weeks. Again, that was the rationale behind it. We already have approved the other traditional if we wanted to keep, but it may be a topic of conversation and looking, and as Anthony and I talked about, making certain the frequency contains, but blurring some of those lines between business versus education, and we just have meetings if every third week would be beneficial to us. So something to think about, and wanted to bring that to the board.
Michelle?
I just wanted to say, we talked about this at I don't know, bylaws in the exam. I was like, when was that? And I really like this idea because, the idea of having the board meetings every 3 weeks instead of twice a month is that we would be freeing up another night for the committee meetings so that it's still twice a month, but the committee meetings would have potentially longer time, but also to avoid the conflicts between committees, so you don't have to choose one or the other because they meet at the same time. Because we've been trying to meet before Board of Ed meetings so that we aren't out 3 Mondays a month, because that just gets to be quite burdensome. So I think this is actually a great compromise in trying to reduce the amount of time while still freeing up a night for some committee meetings, and avoiding overlap of committee time. So I think it's worth trying. If it doesn't work, we can always go back, but I am in favor of the new proposed.
Alan?
Yeah, I'd like to say I agree too. And as Michelle said, actually, the first impetus would be to be able to have easier scheduling, because we run the risk sometimes of having to meet at 3 o'clock on a Monday or at 8 o'clock on a Monday or something, because we couldn't ever squeeze more than, what do we have, 4 committees that need to find out how to meet once a month. So secondary would be to be able to have more time in the meetings, but even primarily, I think, would be to be able to schedule more committee meetings at all. So I'm for that too.
I guess I'll share that, Superintendent, we were talking about committees in general as we were going through the bylaws, and it's really about deconflicting the schedule, not only for our benefit, but also for the superintendent's benefit. She would like to be at all of our committee meetings, and I think we want her to be at all of our committee meetings. Because the committees are here in part for the board to do its job, but also they need to add value to the district and to Megan and her team. And if we're only kind of getting half the bang out of the effort, then I think something definitely needed to be adjusted or changed or tried differently. You know, it's to sit here and bang a gavel at 7 o'clock, you know, and chase everybody out of a conversation doesn't feel right to me, because I feel like you're kind of breaking up a party. You're in the middle of a thought, you're not quite done with something, an hour is difficult, and then considering board members who are working outside of the local community, who have commutes to get back here, et cetera. When you start having meetings that are getting earlier and earlier in the workday, it becomes next to impossible to keep your other job and do this job. Even if you're working from home or you're self-employed, it's still a challenge to try to balance everything. So I think this approach is a really good idea, and I would certainly recommend it to the board that we adopt this. Greg?
Less is more. I move we adopt the amended schedule.
Okay, it's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll say all those that are in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
See how it works. It's going to work.
It's going to work.
It's going to work. It's going to work better. Yes, we will make it work. Very good, Megan. All right, so moving on to the next item is the bylaw 910. We talked about this the last board meeting. It is titled Limits of Authority. You have a red line in your board pack. And let me just say, there were the upfront portion of the first draft, everybody seemed to be in agreement with, and then there was a lot of discussion about the second half of the bylaw, which listed a lot of actual goals of the board, behavior that was seen as productive for a functioning board. But there was a particular word in there that was causing some angst, and rightly so. The word was balanced between the different residents or constituencies of the district. So the bylaws committee went back, and we're suggesting actually two adjustments. One is the language in red that you see in front of you here. We believe gets to the point of the bylaw, which is very clearly articulating what the limits of the authority of the board are. All the other language that was in the previous one was actually, we think, misplaced, that it should be in 9040, which hopefully we'll talk about here in a second, which talks about board responsibilities, which is more appropriate for what that list was meant. So we're not getting rid of it, we've just moved it. But this language, we think, is actually tighter and more succinct and to the points of where the board's authority ends. So that's, let me also say that we were asked to go back to talk to CABE about the word balanced and where that was coming from. And I don't think it's a surprise, but their response was a regional board, any board, has different constituents. You have parents, you have tax-paying residents, and you can cut your constituency pool up in a number of different ways depending upon what somebody's special interest may or may not be, or what their angle is. But we are stewards of the school. We're also stewards of the budget, which is a large portion of their taxes. So state law says that we do need to pay attention to everybody and do what's right for the district, what we believe is right for the district. CABE chose to convert or convey that by using the word balance, which my opinion is a subjective word, because how do you define balance? How do you prove balance? It's not necessarily a clinical definition of balance is 50-50. Balance could be, again, in the eye of the reader. So when we get to 90/40, we're not using that. We're not suggesting we use that word. But again, getting back to this, we thought the first right next step was to structure this bylaw to stay consistent with its title, which is limits of authority, full stop. We'll deal with responsibilities in another direction. So that's what you see in front of you. So, Michelle, anybody else on the bylaws committee want to say anything? Or no? Good?
No, that's
Okay.
said that all.
Greg?
Yeah, I have a couple of technical comments on it. I think it's better. I think it's massively better. Personally, I think CABE was not just wrong, they were wrong on stilts when they went in the direction they went, because frankly, I think as a Board of Ed member, I'm here to educate the children in this district. Now, I'm not silly enough to believe that I could just spend any amount of money or vote to spend any amount of money. I would, because frankly, if I don't have the community support and if I don't have people behind it, then I'm not going to achieve the goal of getting the kids educated. So I think the right formula, though, is not what CABE threw in there. The right formula is the same formula that Justice Potter Stewart used when he defined how you define obscenity in the United States Supreme Court. I know it when I see it. Well, when it comes to the balance between where you strike the balance between constituencies and interests, you always push toward the advocacy of kids. I don't think you can ever say it's time to balance if that means cutting off something that's critical for the children's education. But I think you know there is a balance. You just have to achieve it in your own mind as to how you're going to see it. And I think this is good. Now, the only couple of technical problems I have with this is I think the second sentence is redundant. The first sentence says the Region 12, oh, Lord. I can't wait to get to the policy on Google Docs. All right. 'Cause I can tell you, it's a very simple policy. No. Anyway, it says the Region 12 Board of Education acts as a group and not through any individual member. And then the second sentence says, apart from their function as part of the Region 12 Board of Education, members have no individual authority. Well, I don't know. Haven't taken the SAT in a while, but I can tell you, I think those two sentences are virtual mirrors of each other, and you can eliminate the second sentence. I know there was maybe an attempt to want to elucidate some nuance, but there is no nuance in it. They say exactly the same thing, so I think that's a problem. The second question I have is on the last sentence in here. No member of the Region 12 Board of Education shall be asked to perform any routine or clerical duties which may be assigned to an employee. Does this mean that I will finally get someone to take the minutes at my facilities committee meetings? Because I would dearly love that, and if we pass this as is, I'm not taking minutes anymore.
No.
It may not be assigned to the
Go ahead. Alan?
Well, if you're going to be all legal about it, that would be contingent on the word may, because duties of a Board of Ed committee meeting are not necessarily assignable to an employee, because you're not being asked. I think these duties, clerical duties, are implied as the function and the administration or the operation of the school. So I don't think we ever get our these rules don't apply to things that are entirely the construct of the Board of Ed. So I wouldn't interpret it that way. I just like the little break in between routine or clerical duties. Perform any routine. It's like juggling routine, or what kind of routine are we talking? Comedy routine? But so I mean, there's always holes in this language. They don't demand too much from our minutes. Just who said what now and then. So I think you could.
Well, I can tell you, we're taking minutes of board functions, committee, regular meetings, special meetings, committee meetings is a responsibility of the board, first and foremost. That's not something that we can necessarily, there are limits to where we can delegate that to somebody, as opposed to doing things as it suggests, which I think is more mundane of a definition. But Michelle?
I was going to move we approve for a first reading, just to get it on the floor.
Okay.
Second.
All right.
you.
Motion's been seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes, I think we should amend the motion to eliminate the second sentence.
I
Any
keep-
comments?
Well, I keep rereading it.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying, Greg, although I also, when I read it, it feels a little different because the second sentence says that the members have no individual authority. The other one just says that you can't act as an individual. I know it seems very similar, but I think the point is that we're really trying to drive home the point that you have no authority. So I don't mind it there.
Well, I think the first sentence says that the board acts as a group, not as an individual. And the second sentence makes a point of saying that the individual has no authority to speak on behalf of the group. So I don't think they're in conflict, Greg.
No, but that's not what it says. What it says is, the first one says the Region 12 Board of Ed acts as a group, not through any individual member. Then the next one says, apart from their function as part of the group, the members have no individual authority. Well, what is authority? It is the capacity and right to act. And therefore, I think that those two things say the same thing. There is I admit, there may be a very, very slight nuance, but it doesn't say in terms of speaking for the board versus acting for the board. It's you can't act individually, you can only act with the board. And the next one says you can only act with the board, you can't act individually. So I honestly don't know how those two things say anything different, and I think it's almost a problem for us to.
Well, I think
Did
the
not
most
speak
I think the
English.
most pleasant way to look at it maybe would be that in one sentence the well, English in one sentence the subject is the board, and the other sentence the subject is the board member. So one sentence is speaking on behalf of the board or instructing us on behalf of a board's action, and the other is instructing us on behalf of an individual board member's action. So in as if it might be bothering to give both sides of the table, as it were. I don't think it's saying exactly the same thing. And as Michelle said, I think a little redundance isn't going to kill us, because we want to make sure that we don't have those instances where someone could say, well, the board wasn't acting, I was, or vice versa. So, it's just a sentence.
Yeah, let it go.
Okay.
Take a deep breath.
All right. So the motion's on. The motion's been made, seconded, and we'll go for a vote. So on our first reading, is all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the motion still passes. So we'll move this on. All right, so we had a bit of I'll say a scheduling snafu that I will take full credit for. We met Thursday evening, the bylaws committee met Thursday evening to go through this, and I did not get to Debbie what the other two bylaws I wanted to put on the agenda for this evening. So if I could, I'd like to have a motion to put two additional bylaws on the agenda for first reading this tonight. The first one would be 9040, board's responsibilities, and 9121, board officers. Alan?
So moved.
Second.
Michelle, second. Thank you. All those, Jim?
I'm sorry, do we have those? Are they on there?
Yeah,
They
they're
should have been provided in your board packet, I'm told.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Okay. You good?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion passes. Required a 2/3 vote, but I think we had that to add these to the agenda. So, all right, so first reading 9040, board-related responsibilities. Okay, so this is a continuation of 9010. So what we did was we took the list as it was originally presented and moved them over to 9040 again, where it's more appropriately placed as board-related responsibilities. We did change the first sentence and took we basically kept the first sentence from the previous version, which is what you see there in red at the top. Remove the word balance, so it's not making any subjective statements about outcomes, but saying that we have different people who live in the district who have different needs, and we're going to pay attention to all of them as we do our jobs. And then the sentence that was eliminated originally in 9040 talked about high quality education and establishing as its goals. Again, the bylaws are not the place where boards should have goals, in our opinion. And high quality education is also a very subjective phrase of what exactly that means. So that's why we're suggesting deleting that. The other list is what you saw before. So I think we're preserving what we had, what everybody seemed to like, and updating the board responsibilities as written. Any questions, comments? Michelle?
I move we approve for a first reading.
Second.
9040 board-related
Okay.
responsibilities.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Greg? Well, he's,
Reading.
could have called a vote, but he was in the middle of reading.
I
I saw a look on his face that says, I have a question.
Well, I wish I'd known this was going to be on tonight. I would have paid more attention to it.
It's first reading. Maybe.
I don't know. Some of these seem a little bit more goal than requirement, and that's my structural issue with it. It says we're expected to represent the educational interests of students, public schools, and the district citizens in the state of Connecticut through. And it goes on to list a bunch of things that we're supposed to do. I don't know how this is to be interpreted. If it's not aspirational, how is it to be interpreted? Is someone who was on the board for 3 of the 4 years of the term they've been elected to, who has not suggested any topics to the superintendent of schools or the board chair, should be slated for public censure? I mean, I don't know what this means, and that's the problem with it. And I draft a lot of bylaws, and I just don't know what this means. I think these are goals. I think it's aspirational. I think this is what board members are supposed to do, and I don't think it belongs in as a bylaw. I have serious problems with it, and I'm going to vote against it because I do not know what it means, and I think it's completely aspirational, despite the removal of the sentence about the word goals.
You think, you're suggesting the entire bylaw itself is unnecessary?
The entire bylaw is unnecessary as a bylaw. It's an aspiration, it's a goal, and it should be put in goals. I don't see how you can enforce it, is what I'm saying, because it's going to be grossly subjective, and is this really what we want to do? What if your strength is not in suggesting new things to the superintendent for the agenda, but your strength is being informed about local schools and their programs and activities, suggesting areas in which they need improvement or which they are great? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I think this is like a list of things you're expected to do, and if you don't do any of them, if you don't do all of them, you're deficient as a board member. So again, I think this is aspirational, and you can't take something that's written as an aspiration and by fiat make it a requirement.
Yeah, let me just make one comment. These bylaws, there's no rule or that says we have to have any bylaw, whether CABE suggests it or not, right? I mean, some of them just make good sense, so we have to have them. But this is one where it's really up to us. So if anybody's thinking there's a law out there that says we're compelled to have such a bylaw, there's not. Lisa.
This was in our original bylaws, correct?
It was,
Okay,
yes.
so we didn't create this. We took this from our original bylaws, Greg. And I personally, when I came as a board member, no one tells you what you need to do. I know that these are goals, but I also think that there's a behavior and there are certain things you have to do as a Board of Ed member. I I personally like this because it's a guideline of how what the job entails. I don't know that it's a goal. I think it's a job description or kind of I guess a guideline of how our job is, right? And I don't know where else we would put it because it's not really a goal. It is what it is. It's what our job is. I mean, so I like having it.
Well, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it was in our original bylaws as a goal, and now we've changed the character of it. It's a little like saying that our goal is to make a cake that has a small amount of bitterness in it, and instead we rewrite the rule as you shall fill the cake with vinegar. I mean, the problem is once you go from saying our aspiration is these are the ways in which Board of Education members contribute to you will do this. I mean, to be honest, all the bylaws really need to say is who the officers are, how the organization conducts its meetings, when it has its meetings, how it calls its meetings, and what are the rules of the road. This is a bunch of just feel-good stuff that's being stuffed in here because we want to take some position to show what we do. Put this in the handbook, take it out of the bylaws, is what I say, or restore the word goals. But I think this is a mistake, and it could be used by unprincipled people as a cudgel in the future to no end and to no service of the students in the district.
Jen?
And I mean just no disrespect, but I think that it's fine. We could read every bylaw and we could rip it apart word by word and we can argue it. I don't think it's offensive. I think it's responsibilities. It's not a big deal. Let's just move on.
Michael?
Just seconding with what Jen was saying, and then just responding to some of Greg's concerns. I think Greg is envisioning kind of a future where, a board member could publicly humiliate someone for not hitting number 5 enough. But there's nothing in the language that we're proposing here that says you must do each of these. You must do each of these in an equivalent amount. I think that, Greg, your point about the fact that somebody may have a strength on one area more than another area is just common sense. Isn't that what human beings are all about? I mean, I think that's why we've got many different board members with obviously many different strengths. So I don't really see a problem with it. I think it's a good bylaw.
Michelle?
Yeah, I want to just speak in favor of it as well. I think the reason we struck the goals part is because so as not to confuse this with the goals that we set each year for the district. It's really a list of expectations for being a good board member, a list of responsibilities. And like Lisa said, it just helps new members have an understanding of the job that they have taken on and what's expected of them. So I don't, the title says responsibilities. I think it's pretty clear that this is sort of what is expected of you to be a good board member.
John?
I think we talked about this last time. This is only going to be updated, what was it, 20 years since the last revision?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, and now moving forward, it's going to be another 6 years or something?
No. No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that bylaw
Yeah.
later, but it's going to be a lot.
No, I think
Lot
Greg
more
is
frequent.
right. We should draw a line in the sand. If there's something that is redundant, duplicative, I don't know. I think, yeah, when reading through the list, some of these things are not necessary, or some should be combined or changed. I'm not in favor of just, for the sake of moving it from one section, from one section of bylaws to the next. It needs to be, and no offense to the bylaws committee. I think it is good to revise it, but if we're going to revise it, make some sense out of all of it.
Greg?
Could I offer a suggestion that might fix it from my perspective? And I don't know whether it would fix it from John's, but if with the words "are expected to" were stricken in favor of best, members of the Board of Education best represent the educational interests of students through, or when they, you can replace through with when they, or through, but the idea is that this is aspirational, and I think that if what you want to do is let board members know what they're expected to do, you could do it by saying that they best do it through these means.
Greg, I like those changes.
Yep.
So the first sentence would read, the members of the Board of Education best represent the educational interests of the students, public schools, district citizens in the state of Connecticut when they, colon.
Or maybe you don't want to say when they, because then you have to change advocacy and all these other things. But I think if you said through works.
Just
You could
say
leave
best
through.
represent.
All right, so Michael, as the authority, okay. All right, I would,
We don't have Lori here, but I'll.
you count. We'll keep you. We'll keep you. I could support those changes.
Did I move this?
Yes.
I think I did, so I
Yes, you did.
accept that amendment.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right, so the last two motions that were put on the floor may have been missed on the tape, and that was to postpone the agenda item of reviewing a first review or read of a bylaw 9121. That passed unanimously, and now we're going into executive session, and that motion was made and passed unanimously, so we are going to take a 5-minute transition into executive session. Thank you.
We're going to snack into the room.